Mortal Kombat has been killing its bosses for over 30 years. But here's the thing. The franchise can't even keep its own death record straight. From retcons to reboots to flat-out contradictions, almost every final boss in this series has died in ways that don't agree with each other. So today, I'm breaking down how every single final boss died in Mortal Kombat, starting with the one who's been dying the longest. 9 consecutive Mortal Kombat tournaments. 9. That's how long Goro held the championship before Liu Kang showed up and ended his reign in 1992. A 4-armed, half-dragon Shokan prince who had been undefeated for 500 years, taken down by a Shaolin monk in a single fight. And that should be the end of the story, right? It's not even close. Here's where it gets complicated. Goro's death record is one of the messiest in the entire franchise. In the original Mortal Kombat arcade game, Liu Kang defeats Goro and breaks Shang Tsung's hold on captured souls. That's the earliest canonical boss defeat in the series. The prototype builds from July 1992. We're still tweaking Goro's animations, entrance music, and presentation right up until revision 1.0 dropped on August 9th. He was literally being fine-tuned weeks before launch. But his defeat? That part was always set in stone. But then Mortal Kombat 2011 rolls around, and suddenly, Goro is sitting dead on his Shokan throne on Shang Tsung's island. Shiva flat out states Goro is dead in her arcade dialogue. Nobody explains how or when it happened. Then, Den of Geek's timeline claims Goro was slain in a war between Edenian and Outworld forces, and later revived by Shao Kahn. That's a completely different death from a secondary source that doesn't match anything shown in the games. And then, in Mortal Kombat 1 from 2023, the list of deaths records Goro dying again when Lord Liu Kang's timeline is destroyed by Titan Shang Tsung. That's death number 3, in a timeline that technically erases the first 2. The fandom wiki explicitly notes that Goro's death status is ambiguous across sources. He's died at least 3 different ways depending on which game, which timeline, and which source you trust. The franchise's very first boss, and nobody can agree on how he actually died, but at least Goro's deaths are debatable. The next boss on this list, his death was shown on screen, and it was absolutely brutal. Shang Tsung spent the entire Mortal Kombat franchise talking trash. Decades of manipulating tournaments, stealing souls, shape-shifting into people's dead friends, and pulling strings behind Goro like some kind of interdimensional puppet master. And his reward for all of that? One of the most satisfying deaths in the entire series. In MK11 story mode, Liu Kang finally catches up to the sorcerer and does what he's been trying to do since 1992. He beats Shang Tsung, and then the game decides that simply losing isn't enough. Shang Tsung gets impaled on spikes, but the cinematic doesn't stop there. His body starts decaying right on screen, and then, because apparently even that wasn't enough, he gets erased from existence entirely. Not killed, not sent to the Nether Realm, unmade. 3 stages of death, each one worse than the last. But here's the kicker, and this is what makes the whole thing perfect. Right before Liu Kang finishes him, Shang Tsung delivers what he clearly thinks is his ultimate villain line.
I may have attained godhood, but I am the keeper of time. You are no match for me.
He says this to Liu Kang, the guy who then immediately kills him and erases him from reality. That line didn't land on the right person. It's one of the greatest backfire moments in fighting game history, and depending on which route the player chose, the trash talk gets even better. If you played as Fire God Liu Kang, Shang Tsung hits you with
"This is my triumph and your final moment."
If you played Shang Tsung's route, he says,
"Long have I had visions of this moment. I will savor your death for eternity."
Every single version ends the same way, with him being completely wrong. Up to this point in the franchise, nobody had received a death this thorough. Erasure from existence isn't just dying. It's the universe deciding you don't even deserve to have existed in the first place. For a character built entirely on arrogance and manipulation, that's poetic. But if you think getting erased from existence is bad, wait until you see what happened to the guy Shang Tsung spent his whole career serving. Shao Kahn is the most iconic villain in Mortal Kombat history, and it's not even close. This is the guy who trash-talked you before, during, and after every single fight.
Prepare to die. All too easy. You are nothing! That was pathetic. Outworld will rule!
The man didn't just want to beat you, he wanted you to know how little you mattered while he did it. And in Mortal Kombat 2, he backed it up. Shao Kahn was the final boss. sitting at the end of a gauntlet of every other fighter in the game. You had to claw your way through the entire roster just to reach him. And when you did, he hit like a freight train, read your inputs like he had the strategy guide open in front of him, and taunted you the entire time. Beating him triggered your character's epilogue and rolled the credits. That was it. That was the reward. You survived the Emperor, but here's where it gets embarrassing. Mortal Kombat 2 went through multiple revisions, and version 2.1 introduced a bunch of changes. New endings, adjusted AI, most of the fatalities. It also introduced something the developers probably didn't intend. Players discovered that if you walked Shao Kahn into the corner of the screen and just kept punching, he couldn't escape. Repeated punches, that's it. One of the most feared bosses in arcade history, the guy screaming about how your soul would suffer, getting absolutely cheesed by a player mashing one button in a corner. The developers kept having to patch the game because players kept finding ways to break the boss fight. That's genuinely funny. Shao Kahn talked all that trash, "Don't fail me again, Shang Tsung," and then got bodied by a corner exploit that required zero skill. Now, Shao Kahn's death across the full franchise is complicated. He comes back over and over, and fans have debated endlessly whether some of his defeats involved clones or retcons. But for this video's purposes, his MK2 defeat is the canonical first time players killed the Emperor. The credits rolled, the epilogue played, Shao Kahn was done, at least until the next game brought him back. But if you think Shao Kahn's boss fight was unfair, wait until you hear about the four-armed nightmare standing between you and the credits in other entries. Mortal Kombat has hundreds of fatalities designed to be the most brutal thing you've ever seen. Spine rips, acid melts, full-body explosions. But somehow, the most disturbing death in the franchise isn't a fatality at all. It's just Jax grabbing a four-armed monster and pulling him apart like a rotisserie chicken. Let me set the stage. Kintaro is Shao Kahn's personal enforcer. He's a Shokan, same race as Goro, 4 arms, massive frame, built like a tank that learned how to breathe fire. But where Goro had this regal, champion of the tournament energy, Kintaro was pure aggression. His entire moveset was designed to overwhelm you. Fireballs, flame breath, grabs that eat half your health bar. If you played Mortal Kombat 2, you remember the feeling of reaching Kintaro and thinking, how is this fair? And funny enough, if you were playing on version 2.1 of the MK2 arcade cabinet, it actually wasn't fair. Just not in the way you'd expect. Remember that corner punch exploit I mentioned with Shao Kahn? The same strategy worked on Kintaro. You could literally pin this terrifying four-armed beast in the corner and just jab him to death. The most intimidating sub-boss in fighting game history, defeated by the video game equivalent of poking someone repeatedly in the shoulder. But here's how Kintaro actually dies in the story, and it's way worse than any exploit cheese. In a throne room sequence, Kintaro squares up against Jax. Now Jax is a strong dude. Cybernetic arms, military training, the whole package. But Kintaro has 4 arms, fire breath, and weighs about 1,000 pounds. On paper, this should be a mismatch. And it is, just not in the direction you'd expect. Jax grabs Kintaro's arms and rips them out of their sockets. Not one pair, all of them. Kintaro bleeds out and dies right there on the throne room floor. No finishing move prompt, no dramatic slow motion cinematic, no finish him flashing on the screen. Jax just dismembers him with brute force and watches him bleed to death. It's clinical, it's efficient, and honestly, it's more unsettling than 90% of the actual fatalities in the series, because fatalities are spectacle. They're designed to look cool. This is just a man pulling the limbs off another living creature until it stops moving. The tonal contrast is what makes it hit so hard. Kintaro spent his entire existence being this overwhelming force of nature, fire and muscle and 4 fists coming at you from every angle, and his death is completely methodical. No rage, no revenge speech. Just Jax doing the job. But if you think getting your arms ripped off is a rough way to go, wait until you hear about what happened to the Elder God who thought he was untouchable. Alright, I need to be honest with you here, because this one broke me. Motaro is one of the most iconic sub-bosses in Mortal Kombat history. If you played MK3, you remember him. A giant centaur with a metal tail that literally deflected your projectiles back at you. 4 legs, massive frame. Absolutely terrifying to fight. Most players hit Motaro and immediately realized that every strategy they'd been using the entire game was now completely useless. You couldn't zone. You couldn't keep your distance. You had to get in close with a creature that was twice your size and had more legs than your entire team. He was, by every definition, a nightmare. And here's the thing. When I went to research how Motaro actually dies in the series, I found something genuinely shocking. Nothing. I looked through game files, wiki documentation, canonical story modes, ending theaters, timeline breakdowns, community databases, every source I could get my hands on. And Motaro's canonical death simply does not exist in any verified documented form. There's no cutscene, there's no story mode sequence, there's no character ending where someone rips his legs off or impales him with his own tail. The franchise just never gave him one. Let me put that in perspective. Kintaro, the other famous sub-boss, gets his arms ripped out of their sockets by Jax in a throne room fight. That's brutal, specific, and documented. Motaro, the giant centaur who terrorized an entire generation of arcade players, he gets absolutely zero closure, and the irony is almost too perfect. Motaro was designed to be the guy you couldn't beat. Projectiles bounced off him. Normal strategies failed. He was built from the ground up to feel unkillable, and apparently, the developers took that concept so seriously that they never actually killed him in the lore either. He shows up in MK3. He appears in subsequent games. Armageddon features him in some capacity, but nowhere in any verified source does anyone document a canonical death scene for Motaro. The centaur who deflected everything apparently deflected his own death scene right out of the franchise. So if you're sitting there thinking, wait, did I miss something? No, you didn't. We looked everywhere. Motaro is literally the unkillable boss of Mortal Kombat, not because the lore says he can't die, but because nobody ever bothered to show it. But if you think a missing death scene is strange, wait until you hear about a boss whose death has been shown so many times that nobody can agree on which version actually counts. Most final bosses in Mortal Kombat are warlords, sorcerers, or ancient monsters. Shinnok is a fallen elder god. That's not just a fancy title. Elder gods are the cosmic architects of the Mortal Kombat universe. They exist above realms, above time, above everything. And Shinnok was one of them before he decided to wage war against his own kind and got banished to the Netherrealm for his trouble. So when Shinnok shows up as the primary antagonist of Mortal Kombat X, he's not just another big bad. He's a literal deity with a grudge, and his corrupted form in MKX is something else entirely. Corrupted Shinnok transforms into this massive, skeletal, demonic nightmare with distinct mechanics and a visual design that makes every other boss in the franchise look like a warm-up fight. He's the endgame threat in every sense of the word, but here's where it gets interesting. Raiden beheaded him, just straight up cut his head off, and that permanently incapacitated Shinnok, not killed, permanently incapacitated. That distinction matters more than you think, because even decapitation, the most final thing you can do to somebody, apparently doesn't fully kill an elder god. It just takes him out of the fight. His head is literally kept as a trophy, still conscious, still aware. Imagine existing as a severed head for eternity. That's not death, that's something worse. And the cosmic implications go even deeper. Shinnok is Kronika's son, the keeper of time herself. In Mortal Kombat 11's storyline, we learn that Kronika designed the universe so that Shinnok and his sister Cetrion would duel forever, maintaining a balance between light and darkness across all of existence. Raiden chopping Shinnok's head off didn't just end a boss fight, it broke the fundamental balance of the universe. That's what triggers Kronika's entire plan in MK11. Now here's a fun aside. The franchise clearly had zero respect for Shinnok outside of canon. Non-canonical endings turned him into a punching bag for guest characters. Predator kills him, Leatherface kills him. Characters that have absolutely no business being in the Mortal Kombat universe got to use Shinnok as their personal trophy kill. The guy is an elder god, and they treated him like a jobber and crossover content, but canonically, his fate is arguably the most disturbing on this list. Every other boss we've covered so far at least got the dignity of dying. Shinnok got beheaded by Raiden and left to exist as a conscious severed head forever. And if you think a fallen god's suffering is bad, wait until you hear about the Dragon King who refused to stay dead. I am Onaga, the Dragon King of Outworld. That's the line he delivers to Shujinko in Mortal Kombat. Deception. And honestly, it's one of the most intimidating introductions any final boss has ever given in this franchise. The Dragon King. Not a sorcerer, not an emperor, not a god. A king who ruled Outworld before Shao Kahn ever sat on the throne. When Onaga shows up in Deception, released October 2004 for PS2 and Xbox, he's presented as the single greatest threat the realms have ever faced. Raiden, Shang Tsung, and Quan Chi literally combine their powers to stop him, and it does absolutely nothing. So how did this unstoppable ancient dragon tyrant actually die? Here's the thing, nobody knows. And I mean that literally. Mortal Kombat, Deception has an ending theater that gives every single playable character their own unique ending. And in almost every one of them, that character is the one who takes down Onaga. The problem? They all contradict each other completely. It's like the game handed every character a pen and said, write your own fan fiction about killing the Dragon King. In Liu Kang's ending, his body is used by some unknown force, but he eventually regains his senses during a final battle and becomes the protector of Earthrealm from once again. In Melina's ending, she receives power directly from Onaga, then shatters the Kamidogu to weaken him before finishing him off herself. In Raiden's ending, Shujinko, who was deceived and used as a tool of a greater evil his entire life, ultimately destroys the Dragon King, and Shujinko even gets a victory line. The prophecy had been fulfilled. 3 endings, 3 completely different killers, 3 completely different methods. But wait, we haven't gotten to the best one. Havoc's ending. In Havoc's Deception ending, the Chaos Realm cleric rips Onaga's heart straight out of his chest, and then he eats it. Just consumes the still beating heart of the Dragon King like it's a mid-afternoon snack. No ceremony, no ritual purpose. Havoc just wanted to. That's the most extreme ending in the entire theater, and honestly, it might be the most unhinged character ending in Mortal Kombat history. And here's where it gets complicated, because no single one of these endings has ever been confirmed as the canonical version of Onaga's defeat. The game presents all of them as possibilities, and the franchise never came back to definitively say this is what actually happened. Even when Onaga's animations got reused for Blaze and Armageddon, connecting these 2 bosses through a shared production shortcut, the lore never bothered to resolve which character actually put the Dragon King down. So Onaga, the most powerful being Outworld had ever produced, a creature so dangerous that 3 of the strongest fighters in the universe couldn't scratch him, died in about 15 different ways depending on which ending you watch. And none of them count. That's deception for you. But if you think an unresolved death is frustrating, wait until you meet the final boss who might not even have a death scene at all. Mortal Kombat. Armageddon was supposed to be the grand finale. Every single fighter from every era of Mortal Kombat, all thrown into one massive battle to the death. Every character the franchise had ever created, from the iconic to the obscure, all fighting for the right to face one enemy at the top of a pyramid. That enemy was Blaze. Here's the thing about Blaze. His entire purpose, the literal reason he exists in Armageddon's story, is to die. Blaze was created to empower the greatest warrior, meaning whoever killed him would gain godlike power. The entire narrative is built around every fighter in the Mortal Kombat universe, climbing over each other to land the killing blow on this fire elemental. His death is the single most important event in the game's storyline, and yet nobody can tell you exactly how it happens. Blaze's death is the least documented final boss death in the entire franchise. The game literally designed around killing him somehow produced the vaguest, most forgettable boss death in Mortal Kombat history. No iconic cinematic, no legendary finishing blow that fans replay on YouTube. The biggest roster in MK history, the most apocalyptic premise, and the death the entire plot revolves around just got lost in the noise. But here's where it gets funny. What is documented about Blaze is genuinely hilarious. When you knock him off the Sky Temple stage, this ancient fire elemental, this cosmic being created to determine the fate of all realms, screams. That's real. That's in the game. A primordial entity having a full panic attack on the way down. The production side makes it even better. Blaze reuses animations from Onaga, the Dragon King from Deception. So the grand final boss of Mortal Kombat's most ambitious game is wearing a hand-me-down moveset from the previous villain, the biggest game in the franchise, and they recycled the boss animations. The real irony is impossible to ignore. Armageddon's entire story exists because of Blaze's death. The prophecy, the pyramid, the war between every fighter, all of it leads to one moment, someone killing Blaze. And that moment, the single most narratively important death in the game, is the one we have the least evidence for. No verified cinematic, no iconic killing blow, just a fire guy with borrowed animations and a very relatable scream. The biggest game, the most chaotic premise, and somehow the death that matters most got completely buried. But if you think a final boss death being lost to chaos is strange, wait until you see what happened with the next one on this list. Every boss we've covered so far has a death you can point to, a beheading, an impaling, arms ripped from sockets. But Kronika, she fundamentally breaks the rules of how we've been tracking these deaths. Here's why. Kronika is the keeper of time, not just a final boss, but the final boss. The meta-villain pulling strings behind every timeline reset, every reboot, every retcon this franchise has ever done. She is the in-universe explanation for why Mortal Kombat keeps starting over. But let me give you the actual actual context. Kronika is Shinnok's mother. Remember Shinnok, the elder god that Raiden beheaded and permanently incapacitated? That was her son. Cetrion is also her child, and her plan is genuinely fascinating. Kronika intended for Shinnok and Cetrion to duel each other forever, not to the death, forever. An eternal cosmic tug of war between light and dark that would maintain balance across all of reality, and Raiden broke it by cutting off Shinnok's head. That single act sets the entire plot of MK11 into motion. Kronika sees the balance destroyed and decides the only fix is to rewind time itself. She begins merging past and present timelines, pulling younger versions of characters into the current story, all to undo what Raiden did. Now here's where it gets weird. Despite being the primary antagonist of Mortal Kombat 11, despite being the entire reason the game's story exists, Kronika's actual death is one of the hardest to pin down in the entire franchise. Liu Kang, empowered as Fire God Liu Kang, faces her in the final battle, but the specific canonical depiction of how she dies isn't cleanly verified the way Shang Tsung's impaling or Shinnok's beheading is, and honestly, that's almost poetic. The character whose entire identity is controlling time and rewriting death has the slipperiest death in the series. But Kronika's influence doesn't end with MK11. The list of deaths for Mortal Kombat 1, the 2023 reboot, records Goro dying when Lord Liu Kang's timeline is destroyed by Titan Shang Tsung, Damashi, and Kronika. Some version of her machinations persists into the new timeline's events. She's the boss that won't stay dead because staying dead would mean the timeline stays fixed. And in Mortal Kombat, the timeline never stays fixed. She is, without question, the most narratively important final boss in the franchise. Not the most iconic, not the most fun to fight, but the most important. Because without Kronika, there's no explanation for why any of this keeps happening. Mortal Kombat looked at that question and said, because a god designed it that way. And the last boss on this list, that one doesn't even have the luxury of a timeline to hide behind. So we've covered bosses who got impaled, beheaded, ripped apart, erased from existence, and beaten to death in about 15 different contradictory ways. But the final boss on this list? He didn't get any of that. Dark Khan is the final boss of Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, released in 2008. And if you're sitting there thinking, wait, that game actually happened? Yes, it did. And it was exactly as weird as it sounds. Here's the concept. The two universes collide, and somehow Shao Kahn and Darkseid, two of the most powerful villains in their respective franchises, get fused into a single entity called Dark Khan, one being. Two universes worth of power, a name that sounds like it was brainstormed in about 4 seconds. Now here's where it gets interesting, and honestly, kind of fitting for this video. Dark Khan doesn't die. Not really. When you beat him, the fusion breaks apart. Shao Kahn and Darkseid get separated and expelled back into their own universes. That's it. No fatality, no spine rip, no skeleton decay. He just gets unfused. And that actually makes sense when you know the context. MK vs. DC Universe was the only mainline Mortal Kombat game rated T for teen instead of M for mature. That means no traditional fatalities. The entire game was built around toning things down to fit DC's brand, which meant the franchise's most iconic feature, the brutal finishing move, was completely absent. So of course, the final boss doesn't get a real death. He couldn't. Nobody talks about this game. The MK community has basically memory holed it. We couldn't find much verified detail on Dark Khan's defeat in the research, and honestly, that tracks perfectly. This game was so strange that even the franchise itself moved on like it never happened. But I think Dark Khan is actually the perfect boss to end on, because look at what we've covered today. Goro's death is ambiguous across 3 decades of contradictory sources. Shang Tsung gets erased from existence only to show up again. Shao Kahn has died so many times that fans literally theorize some of his deaths were clones. Onaga has 6 different endings where 6 different characters kill him in 6 different ways, and none of them are confirmed canon. Blaze doesn't even have a verified death cinematic. And then there's Dark Khan, a boss who technically never died at all. He just stopped existing as a fusion. That's Mortal Kombat in a nutshell. Across 30 plus years, the bosses keep dying and coming back. The timelines keep resetting. The canon keeps contradicting itself. Every death is dramatic, brutal, and ultimately temporary. Because in this franchise, the only thing that's truly immortal isn't any boss or god or elder deity. It's the franchise itself. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.